Dear friends, our tonight's speaker is one of the most interesting, most important writer and thinker of our days. Together with the Aspen Institute, he shapes ideas and values of America's leader. He is on the list of Time magazine of the most influential people of the world. He is author of record-breaking biography of Benjamin Franklin, of Einstein, and of course everybody knows of Steve Jobs. 4 years ago, he was moderator in our Ukrainian lunch in Davos. I think this is absolutely incredible chance for us to meet with such a great writer. I can tell you very frankly, this is my absolutely favorite book. I think this is the best book I read during last maybe 2-3 years. I read this book 3 times. I believe that everybody in this room read this book, and luckiest from us even will have chance to receive copy of this book with a signature of the writer. I have the honor, by the way, we all have the honor to participate in the first presentation of this book outside of the United States of America. I think this is unique. And yes, exactly. Please give me big hands to welcome to this stage Steve Jobs of biography writing, Walter Isaacson.
Well, thank you. That's a nicest introduction I've ever gotten. It's great to be with you, Victor, all the dignitaries here, the minister. Nice to see you, Mr. Minister, Mr. Speaker, former Secretary Rice, one of my heroes, former Secretary Daley, former and future Secretary Zellick, I guess we can call him. Minister Javier Solanas. I want to speak a little bit about Steve Jobs and also put him in the context of the great innovators that I've written about. A few years ago, I got a call from Steve when I joined the Aspen Institute. And by the way, thank you, Victor, for all you're helping the Aspen Institute to do with Aspen in Ukraine. And I had written a biography of Benjamin Franklin. I was just finishing the one on Einstein, and Steve said, I want to take a walk with you. I said, sure. And he said, why don't you do me next? I must admit that my first thought was Benjamin Franklin, Albert Einstein, and you. Your ego is a little bit ahead of things. But then I realized that he was sick and that he had led a career that was the epitome. It was the cap of innovation in America. We all know very smart people. You come to conferences like this or go to Davos, you meet smart people all the time. But you come to realize that smart people are a dime a dozen, that they don't usually amount to much. What really counts is the innovative and creative and imaginative people. Those are the people who become the entrepreneurs. Those are the people like Sir Richard Branson and others who really help develop new things. And I looked at what Steve Jobs had done. And over the course of a short career, then, as I said, he was fighting this disease. He had transformed the personal computer industry, the music industry, the film industry, the tablet computing industry, the cell phone industry, all sorts of industries. And he also was the creation myth of a great entrepreneur writ large. Somebody who had started an enterprise with a friend from down the street in his parents' garage and turned it into the most valuable company in the history of the world. And so that's when I realized it would be great to try to understand what drives that type of innovation and entrepreneurship, and maybe to put it into the context of people like Albert Einstein and Benjamin Franklin. And the first thing I realized about Steve was that the reason he was a great entrepreneur is that he had a passion for making great products, beautiful products. He believed that beauty and design and great engineering mattered, and that you had to connect beauty to the feats of engineering he could do. And there are many people, when they go and they become entrepreneurs, they have a passion for making a profit. But Steve told me that if you focus on making the profit, it will never follow. But if you focus on making great products, the profits will follow the great products. That's what he proved during his career. And it was because every single part of a product to him had to be beautiful and had to be good. I remember walking in his neighborhood where he grew up, and he showed me the fence around the backyard of the house that he and his father had built when Steve was about 8 years old. And his father had said to him, "We have to make the back of the fence just as beautiful as the front of the fence." And Steve said, "Why? Nobody will ever see it. Nobody will ever know." And his father said, "Yes, but you will know." And when Steve was making the first Macintosh computer, that beautifully designed, perfectly sealed computer that he did, that you couldn't even open it up, but it had the great icons on the screen and the beautifully curved case. Right before they shipped it, he looked at the circuit board inside, and he said to the engineers, "This circuit board stinks." He actually used a four-letter word, but I won't, a sharper word than that. And they said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, the chips aren't lined up beautifully. They don't look beautiful on the circuit board." And the engineers said, "Well, that's not how you build a circuit board. Plus, this is sealed inside the case. Nobody will ever see it. Nobody will ever know." And Steve said what his father had said to him, "Yes, but you will know." And so they held up shipping that machine until they got the circuit board looking beautiful. And when they did, he asked all 32 engineers to sign their names, and he put his name in the middle, Stephen P. Jobs, in lowercase, so they could engrave it on the inside of the Macintosh next to the circuit board, where nobody would ever see those names, nobody would ever know. But he said real artists sign their work. Over and over again, you see that passion for the product. It led him to do things that great entrepreneurs do, which is bend reality. They called it his reality distortion field. But he drove people to do things they thought were impossible. Sometimes he also drove them crazy, but afterwards they always said it was the best experience of my life because he drove me to do things I did not think I could do. For example, when they were making a game at Atari, this is before they started Apple, Steve Jobs and his friend Steve Wozniak were designing this game, and Jobs said to Wozniak, "You got to do it in 4 days and make it this fast." And Wozniak said, "You understand, Steve, that can't be done." And Steve had taught himself to stare without blinking. And Woz told me the tale of him just looking at him and staring at him and saying, "Don't be afraid, you can do it. Don't be afraid, you can do it." And Woz said, "I stayed up 4 nights in a row and I was able to make the game Breakout." Over and over again, Steve does this. He does this when they're doing the original Macintosh, and it takes about 90 seconds for it to boot up. It was almost as slow and bad as a Microsoft machine. So Steve said to the engineer, Larry Kenyon, you got to shave 10 seconds off the boot up time. Steve, Kenyon says, well, look at the code. I can't shave 10 seconds off. And Steve said, if you could save a human life, would you do it? And he said, well, maybe so. So Steve goes to a whiteboard and just shows them. There'll be 1 million Macintoshes sold next year. They'll be booted up about twice a week. In the course of a year, you'll save 130 lifetimes if you take those 10 seconds off. Larry said, I went back to my cubicle, and within a week, I had shaved 28 seconds off the boot up time. Over and over again, as he's pushing great products, he wants to make them simpler and more beautiful. Most famously, the iPod, where he just says, I want 1,000 songs in the pocket, and you get to whatever you want in 3 clicks. The engineers kept saying, well, we need a screen to do this. We need to look at the album, the artist. And he'd say, no, don't be afraid, you can do it. 3 clicks. Get rid of the album. People just want to get to the song they want. Finally, they come up with that beautiful design of that scroll wheel. And Steve loves it. He get to where he wants. No instructions, no manual, in 3 clicks. And he says, but what's this? He's pointing to the little button on top. And he actually, again, uses stronger language. He goes, what the is this? And the engineers pause for a second and say, no, he knows what it is. And finally, one of them says, Steve, it's the on-off switch. Steve nods for a moment and says, what the does it do? They're a little flummoxed. He knows what it does. Finally, someone says, Steve, it turns it on and off. And then Jobs says, why do we need it? And it slowly dawns on them, you don't even need that on-off switch, that if you quit using your iPod for a while, it'll power down. If you start using it again, it'll power back up. And so he's able to convince them to do that most beautiful device. And finally, when it comes to the iPhone, he wants a really beautiful piece of glass to cover it, not plastic, which will look cheap, but he wants it to be a tough, smooth glass. The Chinese and others making the glass for the stores, it didn't meet his standards. So finally he calls Corning Glass, and he gets a meeting with the head of Corning. And he says, I need this type of glass. And the guy who's running Corning, Wendell Weeks, says, well, we once invented something called Gorilla Glass that's really tough and smooth. It's what you want. But we never made it. We never manufactured it. And Steve said, I want this amount by September. We're going to ship the phone for Christmas. And the guy said, well, I just told you it can't be done. We've never done it before. This is 30 years to the day, almost, that he did it to Wozniak. But Wendell Weeks, the head of Corning, just sat there. He told me the story. He said, it was amazing. This guy just sits right across from me and stares without blinking and says, don't be afraid. You can do it. Finally, Wendell Weeks picks up the phone and calls a Corning glass plant near Lexington, Kentucky, and tells the manager, I want you to switch tomorrow to making Gorilla Glass according to that formula we once had. And the manager says, well, it's going to take me a while. I don't have the... And Wendell Weeks said, I just said to him on the phone, don't be afraid. You can do it. And lo and behold, by September, every piece of glass, and nowadays every piece of glass on every phone and every iPad is made by Corning because of Steve's don't be afraid, you can do it. That was that type of passion he had, and I realized I saw it in everybody I've written about. For example, Einstein had that passionate curiosity. When he was a young kid, his father gave him a compass, one of those little toy compasses that points north. And Einstein said, day after day, I walked outside and turned it, and it twitched, and it pointed north, and I was amazed because nothing was touching the needle. You and I probably remember getting a compass when we were kids, right? We go outside and we say, wow, that's neat, it points north. And about a minute later, we're on to something, look, a dead squirrel, or, and we're on to something else. his entire life, Einstein is trying to figure out, how does a force field really work? He does it, when he's 17 and he starts looking at Maxwell's equations that describe an electromagnetic field. And if you look at Maxwell's equations, or if you're Einstein and you look at Maxwell's equations, they say that a light field, a light wave, always has to travel at a constant speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. Einstein at age 17 is saying, but what if I caught up with it? What if I were moving really fast? Wouldn't it look stationary to me? But Maxwell's equations don't allow for that. He said he walked around so worried about this that his palms would sweat. Now, I remember what was causing my palms to sweat at age 17, and it wasn't Maxwell's equations. But it was that type of passion that caused him, as a patent clerk, when he couldn't get a job teaching physics, couldn't get his doctoral dissertation accepted by the Zurich Polytech, to keep wondering. And he's looking at devices that try to synchronize clocks, because there are a lot of patent applications for synchronizing clocks. The Swiss had just gone on standard time zones, and those of you who know Swiss people, they tend to be rather Swiss. They wanted to strike 7 in Bern the exact same moment it strikes 7 in Zurich. And Einstein is saying you need to send a signal between the two clocks to synchronize them. But if you do, somebody traveling in one direction will see the clock synchronized in a different way than somebody traveling real fast in the other direction. And he said, so that's why the speed of light is constant, but time is relative, depending on your state of motion. Now, don't be afraid if you don't get that right away, but that's just a simple leap of the imagination that is all special relativity is all about. And it was that type of imagination, those leaps of innovation, that set him apart. Benjamin Franklin was very curious too. He always was like at age 17 when he was a runaway, and all three of the guys I wrote about ran away from home at age 17. So there's something in there about being the rebel. But he's like measuring the water temperature in the Atlantic Ocean and discovering the Gulf Stream. But more than curiosity, he had something that I think is very important as we look at Ukraine, we look at the world today, which is that he had a deep sense of tolerance and a belief in the free flow of ideas and information. When he got back from England on that first trip, he started a group called the Leather Apron Club. It was a club of all the middle-class tradesmen in Philadelphia who were trying to start shops and businesses. And they made a list of virtues that you had to have if you wanted to be a good entrepreneur, but also be part of a good community, a good civil society. And in the autobiography, you see those virtues listed: industry, honesty, frugality. And every week, he checks off whether he's mastered that virtue. And after a while, he's mastered all 12, and he shows it to the other people in his group. And one of them says to him, Benjamin, there's a virtue that perhaps you ought to try, a virtue that maybe you should have on your list that you ought to try to master. And Franklin says, what's that? And the friend says, humility. You might try humility for a change. And Franklin's great line is, I never was able to master the virtue of humility, but I was good at faking it. I was very good at the pretense of humility. But the pretense of humility, he said, was important to the type of society we were creating, because it made you listen to the person next to you and made you try to find common ground with them. And that's why he does things, as Victor and others have done, start a newspaper, start 17 newspapers up and down the coast, but also a great competition. It was the 12th newspaper in Philadelphia. And he starts a postal system that allows all newspapers in the colonies to go up and down the coast. And that notion of free flow of ideas and free flow of information and tolerance is part of the humility or at least the faking of humility, that Benjamin Franklin thought was so important. And you see it when the Continental Congress puts together a committee to write the Declaration of Independence for our country. It was probably the last time our Congress put together a good committee, with all due respect, Mr. Speaker. It had Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Ben Franklin on it. So it's a pretty good committee. And you can see in the drafting of just that second paragraph, the beautiful second paragraph, how they are open to ideas and balance. Because Jefferson started that paragraph by writing, "We hold these truths to be sacred." And in the second draft, you see Franklin's printer's pen doing the backslashes. "We hold these truths to be self-evident." And he argues before the committee that our rights come not from the dictates of any particular religion, but being open to all beliefs and the rationality and reason. And then the sentence goes on to say, in the first draft, they're endowed with certain inalienable rights. And you see John Adams's handwriting, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. And just in the editing of one half of one really beautiful sentence, you see that balance of people not trying to use religion to tear us apart, but to make a balance that comes from openness and tolerance and a belief that the people next to you maybe have good ideas as well. And it even holds true in the Constitutional Convention, where they're fighting over the big states, little states. And Franklin makes them line up and sign onto a compromise to have a House and a Senate. And when they ask afterwards, "What have you brought us, Dr. Franklin," when they open the doors of Independence Hall, he says, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." That's the type of civil society that the Ukraine has been building and that is the opportunity of making it a great 21st century country. That belief that in an information age, you have to believe in everybody being tolerant of free ideas and free expressions. That's what Benjamin Franklin taught us. For their whole lives, all three of the people I wrote about it were dedicated to such causes. For Einstein, even on his deathbed, even after his aorta had burst and they told him, "You're going to live maybe 1.5 more days," he asked for his papers from Princeton to be brought to him. And he just writes line after line of equations, his handwriting getting shaky near the end, but line after line of equations trying to get the unified field theory to figure out why that needle twitches and points north, why gravity and electromagnetism are part of a unified field. And as for Franklin, during his lifetime, he donated to the building fund of each and every church built in Philadelphia. And at one point, they were building a great hall. It's still there next to Independence Hall for visiting preachers, so that a visiting preacher of the Great Awakening could have a pulpit. And Franklin wrote the fundraising document, and he said, even if the Mufti of Constantinople were to send somebody here to preach Islam to us and to teach us about the Prophet Muhammad, we should offer a pulpit and we should listen, for we could learn. And then on his deathbed, he's the largest individual contributor to the Mikveh Israel Synagogue, the first synagogue built in Philadelphia. So when he died, instead of his minister accompanying his casket to the grave, all 35 ministers, preachers, and priests of Philadelphia linked arms with the rabbi of the Jews to march him to the grave. It was that type of open intolerance that we're still fighting for in the 21st century. And as for Steve Jobs, it was exactly this time last year, last September, when I think it became clear to all of us that what he called staying one step, one lily pad ahead of the cancer, that he might not outrun it forever. And so he and I, a year ago this month, were sitting there. He was very sick, quite a bit of pain. And I remember asking him about his legacy and his life, about the notion that we all make products that make everybody a little bit better off, and that's our legacy. And I said, with your religion that you grew up with and your Zen Buddhist training, do you believe still that something lives on after you die? Do you believe in God? Do you believe in a spirit, as Einstein said, that's manifest in the universe, that you're a part of, that will live on? He said, yes, I really like to. I really like to believe that all your accumulated wisdom and all the things you've done somehow don't just disappear, but live on, somehow are incarnated in different ways and live on after you die. And then he paused for a long time and he said, but sometimes I worry, sometimes I think maybe it's just like an on-off switch, you die and boom, click, you're gone. I got kind of quiet, I didn't say a word. And then he gave me that wonderful half smile that he had, and he said, maybe that's why I didn't like to put on-off switches on Apple devices. So anyway, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Now we have time for a few questions. I will, Marek, I will use my right. I will ask just one question. First question, but second question is yours. Steve Jobs united technology and design, and I think even not design, but art. And I spoke with one of my favorite artists, Jeff Koons, and he told me, Victor, what he created, this is piece of art, this is sculpture. Okay, what do you think? This is his unique personal trick, or it will become a part of business for the future? What do you think? Just your opinion.
I think that connecting art to technology was a unique contribution Steve made. Up until then, computers were sort of commodities. They all came in boxes, they were all beige, and they competed on price. As a businessman, if you only compete as a commodity, you're not really adding the great value. So that is what he felt set Apple apart. In our very first interview for the book, he said that when he was young, he met Edwin Land, the head of Polaroid. And Edwin Land always told him to stand at the intersection of the arts and the sciences. And whenever Steve introduced a new product, the iPad, the iPhone, the iPod, the last picture on the screen was always those two street signs to keep and reminding him that that was what it was all about. A year ago, at the end of August, on August 29th, he goes into the Apple boardroom and says that day has come, that he has to step down. And they kind of try to jolly things up a little bit, the members of the board. And so they start making fun of Hewlett-Packard, which had just gotten out of the computer tablet business that morning. And Steve said, wait a minute. When I was 13 years old, Bill Hewlett gave me my first job. And he and Dave Packard thought they had made a company that would keep innovating each new generation. But these bozos who are running it have screwed it up. Don't let that happen to Apple, he said. In Apple's DNA is the connection of beauty to technology. And 100 years from now, people should still say that that's what makes great products in the information age.
Thank you. Marek, please. You need this.
Okay. I was going to let you answer.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank Walter for this presence here, and I have to congratulate him, his patience, because following, I read the book once about Steve Jobs, and I think you had to be a very patient person to follow Steve Jobs, relating his story, and so on and so on. And really, there must be somebody who is speaking about the big guy and bringing him closer to us. And I believe that, well, I have iPad 3, you have iPad 4, somebody maybe have iPad 5. And I think that Steve Jobs brought us close to the word we are speaking about, closer to freedom, access to information. He brought us closer to this, what is most important at this moment. So I think, Steve, I don't know where are you. Thank you for this ambassador. He's a good guy. And thank you for this, what you did for us. And really we appreciate, and we are really close to you. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much. I feel the same. Okay, please, we have time for a few questions.
If you ask a question, you get a free book. So go ahead.
Yes, yes.
Up, hands go up.
Please, Eric.
I know Eric, yeah. Eric is standing at that intersection too in the next new field, which is biotechnology.
So, Walter, I of course love the book and of course read it on my iPad, which I felt was the only way to read the book. But in your book, you describe how, of course, Steve is so brilliant and also so terrible to many of the people around him. Was that essential to the creative character of Steve Jobs, or was it unnecessary to the character? You've studied these really creative people. How do you reconcile those?
You know, at the end of the book, I talk about how the passion and the personality are connected to the product. It's all a seamless web as to who he is. And I would ask him over and over again, because he was indeed unkind, a jerk, or actually he had a technical term that begins with A, but I won't use it here. He said, yeah, you've discovered, you know, I'm this way, what's the big news? And I said, well, did you have to be so tough on people? Did you have to be so mean? And he said, if you want to prevent the bozo explosion of having a lot of dumb people with a lot of dumb ideas around you, you have to be tough at times. And I'm the only one willing to do it. He said, maybe where you come from on the East Coast, he said to me, there's a velvet-gloved and silver-tongued way to do it. But I'm just a kid from California, and if something stinks, I'm going to tell people it stinks. But over and over again, I would ask that question, and I don't try to answer it in the book. I think Steve is an amazing person, a wonderful person, but this is not a book that's a recipe for how to live your life. This is a biography of a real person. So there's strengths and weaknesses, and you've got to take out of it, I could do this, but maybe not do that. But whether it's Andy Hertzfeld, you know, the young friend on the original Macintosh team, to Wozniak, when I'd say, what should I ask Steve, they'd always say, did you have to be so tough? Did you have to be so mean at times? And when I asked Wozniak that question, I said, well, you answer it. Did he have to be? And Wozniak said, no, if I had run Apple, we would have run it like a family. I would have made sure everybody had stock options. I would have been much nicer to people, and I was always tried to be much nicer to people. And then there was a long pause, and he said, but you know, if I had run Apple, we never would have made the Macintosh. So go figure. You're supposed to answer that question after reading the book. I don't. I'm just a storyteller, not a preacher.
Okay. Questions?
I'll do it. Yeah, do whatever you want. You're the man. Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay, dear friends. After this session, you will have unique opportunity to ask writer for signature. I already saw that one bravest and smartest from us already use this opportunity, Turkish Minister Bagish, but he has right because he helped me to convince Prime Minister Erdogan to be key speaker on our conference. But okay, you have right also. We have almost 100 books. Okay, this is unique opportunity. Please use this. Walter, thank you very much for this absolutely incredible presentation.
Thank you for having me.